When you think about the Black freedom struggle in the 1960s, you probably picture one single story, right? Marches, nonviolence, Dr. King's dream of integration. But that's not the whole picture. Underneath that familiar narrative, a really fierce debate was going on, one that actually split the movement into two very different, very powerful paths.
And that gets us to the big question we're tackling here. Were the civil rights and Black power movements just two sides of the same coin, or were they totally different revolutions, fighting for completely different futures? To figure that out, we've got to understand where each one was coming from.
So first up, let's talk about the movement that has really become the defining story of that time. That's the mainstream civil rights movement and its powerful, central dream of a fully integrated American society. By the middle of the 1960s, you really can't argue with the results. The strategy of nonviolent direct action was getting things done. I mean, the huge march on Washington in '63, it created this unstoppable momentum that led right to the historic Civil Rights Act of '64, which finally banned segregation. And then, after the absolute brutality we all saw in Selma, we got the Voting Rights Act of '65. These were just monumental, hard-fought victories. And of course, the moral heart of this entire movement was captured perfectly by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The goal was never about separation. It was about finally making the American dream a reality for everyone. The whole idea was to build a country where your race just didn't define your life or your chances to succeed. But, and this is a huge but, here's where the story gets a lot more complicated. For a whole new generation, especially young folks in the urban ghettos up north, these new laws just felt distant. See, their daily fight wasn't against legal segregation signs. It was against police brutality, terrible housing, and just no economic opportunities. So even with new laws on the books, for so many people, life on the ground just wasn't changing. It raised a really tough question. What good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't even afford to buy a burger? All that simmering frustration? Well, it was about to just explode into the national spotlight, giving birth to a brand new, and much more radical, voice in the fight for freedom. This, right here, this is the exact moment the split really went public. Okay, so picture this. June 1966. An activist named James Meredith starts a solo march against fear down in Mississippi. But then he's shot by a white gunman. Leaders like Dr. King and a young, really charismatic activist from SNCC named Stokely Carmichael, they rush down to continue the march in his honor. But during that march, Carmichael gets arrested and thrown in jail. And when he gets out, he is furious. He gets up in front of a crowd and just unleashes this rallying cry that would change everything. He shouts, "We've been saying freedom for 6 years and we ain't got nothing. What we're gonna start saying now is Black power." That chant, it was so raw, so defiant. It was a complete earthquake compared to the familiar songs like "We Shall Overcome." It was basically a declaration of a whole new philosophy. So, what did Black power actually mean? Well, it drew from a long history of Black nationalism, from thinkers like Malcolm X. And at its core, it was a call for racial pride and for self-determination. The main idea wasn't to try and get accepted into a flawed, white-run society. No, it was about building independent economic, social, and political power for Black communities and by Black communities. And you can probably guess what happened next. This new philosophy put the Black power movement on a direct collision course with the mainstream civil rights movement. So let's break down exactly where they differed. I mean, when you put it side by side, the divide is crystal clear. The civil rights movement, it was working for integration and legal equality inside the American system. The Black power movement, it was focused on self-determination, on building power for Black communities. Dr. King's movement was absolutely, strictly nonviolent. Black power advocates, though, they followed Malcolm X's call for self-defense by any means necessary. And while white allies were a key part of the civil rights movement, Black power advocates were pretty skeptical, arguing that Black people had to be the ones to lead and control their own struggle. You see, for Dr. King, nonviolence wasn't just a tactic. It was a deeply held belief. He saw it as the only way to avoid what he called a descending spiral of hate and revenge. To him, love wasn't some passive, weak idea. It was a powerful, active force that could actually change society and win over the conscience of the nation. And then, in total contrast, you have Malcolm X. For him, self-defense was just a basic human right. His thinking was incredibly practical. He basically asked, how can you be nonviolent with somebody who is being violent with you? If the government can't protect you or won't protect you, then you absolutely have the right to protect yourself. And this difference in thinking went all the way to the end game.
For Dr. King, the ultimate goal was integration, getting a real seat at the table of brotherhood. But for Malcolm X and other Black nationalists, that was like putting the cart before the horse. They argued that Black communities needed to build their own table first, control their own economies, their own politics, their own cultures. And only from that position of strength could you even begin to talk about true equality. Okay, so you've got these two powerful, competing visions out there. What was the long-term impact? How did this clash of ideas end up shaping the future of the fight for justice?
Well, the legacy of Black power was just huge. It went so far beyond politics. It created this deep, powerful sense of Black pride and cultural identity. It pushed for celebrating African heritage in everything from art to college courses. And on a practical level, groups like the Black Panthers started essential community survival programs like the free breakfasts for kids that directly tackled the economic problems that laws alone just couldn't solve. And all of this inspired a whole new generation of activists, from the Chicano movement to Native American rights to the LGBTQ movement.
And that, right there, brings us to today, because the DNA of both of these movements is woven directly into modern activism. I mean, just think about it. The push for civil rights and legal protection that Dr. King championed, and the demand for self-determination and an end to systemic racism that the Black Power movement fought for, both of those powerful ideas flow right into movements like Black Lives Matter.
So, we're going to end where we started with something for you to think about. This tension between two different approaches, the push to reform the system from the inside and the push to build new systems of power from the outside. That's not some dusty piece of history from the 1960s. So the question is, how do you see the echoes of integration and self-determination shaping the ongoing fight for justice today?